everybody, and welcome to the show. This week we have one of the developers behind a pretty popular video game, Darkest Dungeon. Say hi, Chris.
Hi, how's it going?
And you've decided to grace our show with your presence. Thank you very much for doing so. A humble little show. So why don't you tell us more in detail what your involvement with Darkest Dungeon was?
Okay, sure. Thanks for the invite, by the way. And I had been thinking about a game like this for quite a while, quietly, while I was working a combination of freelance illustration and concept art positions around Vancouver, and I'd been talking to my good friend Tyler Sigmund about it. We'd been sort of sharing some scotch and doing the "wouldn't it be cool if" type thing, and eventually the timing just kind of landed. His company got bought out or acquired or something, and I got laid off of Microsoft doing contract concept art, and we both just decided to kind of take the plunge. So we co-founded the company and started to work on Darkest Dungeon. So I guess my involvement was
joint creation,
getting the company going, incorporating that company, right up to doing concept art and then production art and writing and marketing and all of that stuff.
Jack of all trades.
By necessity, I had to adapt.
Yeah. We've with all the game devs we've had on here, that's been the case. You always have to, with small games, you always got to work 5 hats, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's part of the appeal and also part of the cross you bear.
Yeah, because when you're making a game, or any piece of art really, you want to have as much control as possible. There's and that's something that's always confused me, is like on film. I'm in college for film right now, and they're always telling me like, oh, you got to get your own cinematographer. I'm like, why wouldn't I want to shoot it? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a tricky line between that sort of that optimistic, gumption, and then just like naive arrogance, where like, I can do it all myself, I can do it, and then you realize you can't. You can't run the ball as far alone as you can with a really good team, and certainly I think that's been one of the things that's been really successful for us, is having both Tyler and I. Heavily invested in guiding the game and the company, is that you have a partner, you have someone you can rely on. And we actually gave a GDC talk in the spring about being partners. It's not always easy, but I definitely think it's helped both of us.
Yeah, it sounds really useful because you can cover each other's flaws quite easy.
Yeah, exactly, and complement each other's strengths, hopefully. Yeah. Otherwise, if you're too in sync, then you're just basically exacerbating your own pluses and minuses, which, works in an RPG, but it's pretty terrible in real life.
It just becomes a circle jerk then.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that, but...
I have a friend, a good friend of mine, Jack Farrell, and I make sure that he's my partner, basically, on whenever I do stuff, and we always make sure to be very harsh and critical of each other, just to make sure we're always on the ball.
Yeah, it's good to have somebody else who's working alongside you and you can kind of hold you accountable, even if not through direct critique, but just by watching their efforts. When you start to feel your own motivation slip a little bit, you look over and there's somebody working really hard, and you sort of can find some strength in that.
Yeah. So I have a little bit of a question about just like the core gameplay kind of thing. Did you guys take any inspiration from XCOM by any chance? Like the originals?
I think it's like undeniable to try and XCOM, I played the most of the second XCOM, the underwater XCOM.
Mm-hmm.
I think Tyler was heavy into both of them. So, I mean, I'm sure it's in there, but we didn't sit down and say, how do we make a game that expresses our love of XCOM.
Yeah.
In fact, it was only one of the tertiary influences when we were really putting together sort of a map of what we wanted to pull from. We talked a lot more about things like Eye of the Beholder and Pool of Radiance and Bard's Tale and games like that, like sort of classic CRPGs. That was kind of mainly where we pulled from. XCOM was in there, but in a way we looked at like the moment that your guy goes crazy and shoots your other guy in XCOM, that is kind of where like there's an entire game in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really, what we used XCOM for was not even really as an anchor for our roster management or anything like that. It was really like the moment your guy goes crazy and shoots another guy, what if there was a whole host of more interesting things he could do? And what if that was literally the entire game? Because we don't have, the scope or the staff to be able to support it. You remember at this time, it was two of us, three of us counting the engineer. So we had to keep it like really, really small in our minds so that it could be doable, because the last thing we wanted to do is just sit around and waste our time and money promising each other how cool the features would be and never getting to develop them.
That's always, you always see the Kickstarters like, hey, it's 3 of us, we're gonna make the next Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, that's a little too much of that sort of that optimistic. I think it comes from a good place too, but like that optimistic arrogance of like, we can do it. There's so many new tools available nowadays, but it's really easy to start something, and it's really, really hard to stay focused long enough to actually wrap it up and finish it.
I think
so we were really conscious of that.
I think Darkest Dungeon more suits the gameplay than XCOM does, actually, because in Darkest Dungeon the mood is very dark and oppressive and sad. In XCOM you got a sense of hope, a bigger sense of hope. Like, if we just keep doing it, we can push back those aliens, all that stuff. But it kind of it's that little bit of disconnect, like, oh, you just lost your best soldier, like you've been raising him since he was a little recruit and all that shit, but you still got that hope sense there. But when Darkest Dungeon, you lose the guy, it's just like, oh, you fucked up. It's awful. It's like you feel sad. It's like, damn. I feel it fits it better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think XCOM definitely has its own identity, and I think it would be remiss not to like give it the reverence that it's due. I think like we tried to set expectations. Like even when you start our game, there's that little blurb of text, and it was like a late addition. We actually threw that in because we're like about to launch early access, and everyone was running out of money, and we're like, fuck, I hope this thing sells, and so we're like, what if people get really mad at us because you could lose your heroes that you'd spent so much time leveling. So we're like, oh, well, let's just tell them. Let's just put it right in the beginning. And then that became kind of like iconic, that little paragraph of text going like, hey, you're going to lose, you're going to die. It's kind of part of the game. And that was really just as a stopgap to orient people's expectations before the game even started. But I think it worked really well. And it was a bit of a nod to those classic horror movies where they run the entire credits before the movie actually starts. I like that kind of like slow build up to the title screen.
With today's Steam, you said you were concerned about sales first. With today's Steam marketplace, do you guys think that it would have sold as well as it did when it came out? Would have got that notoriety?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. I mean, we had the same exact fear about the Steam marketplace. 3 years ago. I can't even believe it's 3 years old. But yeah, when we were about to launch early access, we're like, it's so crowded. The numbers just keep getting bigger and bigger, but the fear, I think, is the same. I sort of got to this place of like, maybe it's a little blind hope. But like, if your game looks visually interesting and has a very clean, well-articulated hook or idea behind it, I gotta believe that it will find an audience. I think there's, Battle-Right is the same thing, like came out of nowhere. Frostpunk did extremely well.
I heard about that. I'm really interested.
And so I tend to see that, like, I'm sure there are games that try to do everything right and just can't crack the Steam marketplace, which, is certainly unfortunate. And I'm sure there's many, many interesting, compelling, and probably unsettling stories around that. But I have decided I have to just believe that there's always going to be room for something that looks and feels tight and cohesive. And there always seems to be, there's always a couple of wild cards. If you look at the top sellers, like there's always a couple that slip in there that you're like, where did that come from? Like Raft has been in the top 10 for I think 2 weeks now. And yeah, it's riding on the survival multiplayer, crafting thing, But like, you build a raft, it survive a giant shark. That's what I'm getting from the icon. The colors look good, and there it is in the top 10. No hype before it came out. I had no idea that it even existed, and it's probably enjoyed a decent amount of financial success. Followed immediately by House Flipper. I don't know, so I think like there's definitely still room in Steam to stand out, but it's really hard if you're sort of like 8th in line on a trend and your game kind of just looks like a video game. I think you really have to be able to button everything up into a nice package.
I think it only takes like one YouTuber, I think, because like once like there's one like mid like say like 100,000-200,000 sub YouTuber that like covers a game or something like that, then like it'll spread around, people start requesting others, and then like it starts spreading and that's always the case. As long as the game's of quality, I think it'll do well.
I hope so. Like I said, I want to believe it. I'm sure there's data out there that would undermine that position. I wouldn't want to, like, for us, we just tried not to take anything for granted. So I wouldn't want to rely on the whims of one popular YouTuber.
Absolutely.
So like when we started, Tyler immediately started, kind of working through how we could structure some of these game systems to deliver this, type of flawed heroism and that kind of thing. And I started to work on a trailer, even though there was no game, because we wanted to release a trailer early to see if there was even any interest in the themes and tones that we were exploring. And from there we went to Kickstarter. Again, that was a check-in for us to be like, look, if this thing doesn't fund, we shut it down. Because we're grown men with like children and responsibilities and costs of living. Like, we can't just sit around on milk crates and eat ramen. So like, if we weren't going to find an audience, we had to get out. And if we barely funded, then we would deliver a game, but certainly not the game we wanted to make. So we used all of these opportunities to sort of check in with the market and see if we were hopefully still on the right track. And each one bore out positively, so we continued to the next. If Early Access had been a flop, then we would have had to, listen to that and adjust our plan.
Mm-hmm.
So how well did the Kickstarter do? Because I wasn't following it at the time.
We asked for 75K and we netted 313. So about 300%, a little over 300%.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really good and a very big thrill. Obviously, there's games that have done orders of magnitude higher than that.
Star Citizen.
Star Citizen is an exemplary example of.
Except yours is out.
Yeah, well, Yeah, there's a lot of games that have done really well. Banner Saga was a big inspiration to us in terms of Kickstarter and how to run one and what was possible with Kickstarter. Because Banner Saga 1 to me was like one of the first big Kickstarter success stories. So we thought a lot about that.
Yeah, and do you think like Wayne June, because it's his birthday, happy birthday Wayne June.
It is, happy birthday Wayne.
But do you think like, when did you get him involved with like the trailers and stuff? Because that must have been a real big hit, seeing as you got him in the trailers and then decided he has to be in the game. So
yeah, that was pretty much how it went. Like I had been freelancing for years, and I would work really late at night. This is before I had kids, and I could stay up late, and I would put on these Lovecraft audiobooks that he had narrated, and I just loved it. And I think he had done 3, and I think he did 3 more. So I kind of got on while there was new content kind of coming out, and I would just listen to them again and again and again and again. And so fast forward like a year or so, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna make this game. We need a trailer, and I refused to do the standard. Like, I researched all this stuff about how you make trailers. And 40 seconds long, and introduce a new game mechanic every 5.2 seconds, and make sure there's text so that if people watch it with the volume off, they there's all these rules of thumb. And I was like, fuck, I don't want to do any of that. That sounds like garbage. And it didn't honor the spirit of the game. So I'm like, I want something slow. Like, we don't have any gameplay footage, so I just want to make a short little animated thing that tries to communicate what the game is about without saying anything about the game. And we're like, well, we need VO. We need a voiceover for sure. And so I'm like, and then Tyler's like, well, I guess we could. What about that guy you listened to? We could ask him. And I'm like, no, we couldn't ask him. So I emailed him. He's like, yeah, cool. And he did.
You know, that's
did the trailer.
That mirrors us asking to come on the show.
Yeah. So he did the trailer, and then we were in the audio guy Jeff's place in Richmond, and I'll never forget, like, because he's high rise, so we're looking out over like the west coast. You can kind of see parts of Richmond and leading out to the ocean, and then he plays the audio mix with the video that was all done and time locked, and then threads the processed VO in there, and it was just like we all just looked at each other and we're like, well, now we need a fucking narrator in the game because that's just too good. Like, it was just too good. So I basically wrote the character around, you know, his voice, and how well I know the way he speaks helps me choose the right words, because I can anticipate how he'll say them because I've heard so much of his stuff, and it worked out really well. Yeah,
a lot of I've seen like videos saying that the narration is one of the things that makes the game like just that much more impactful, just because it, you know, even if like little failures and little successes become so much more when someone's like telling you how good they are, you know?
Yeah, and I think his performance is really good too. Like it strikes this like sardonic chord where I think all the way through the game you're not totally sure what he wants, you know, like if he wants you to win or if he's just there to have a laugh at you, or like, I really love sort of how ambiguous he delivered that. And I don't know if you guys have ever beat the game or not, but there's a whole tie in there.
I haven't yet, but I'm really planning on it because I want to fucking get through that whole game, but
it's a hard video
quite
game.
long too.
It's a long video game. I think one of the most honest and valid critiques of the game is that it stretches a bit too long. I think that's true. That's why we added that like Radiant mode update and tried to shave off some of the grind and accelerate some of the, you know, the midsection. I think it sags a little bit in the midsection. But that's kind of the risk of doing sort of a procedural game. And then in the way we structured early access was, we kept adding to the middle of the game and wanted to hold back the final dungeon so that when we officially launched the game, it was the first time anyone had seen or was able to actually beat it and go through the final dungeon area. And so we had no metrics on how long it would take to go from start to finish because there was no finish for that year in early access. So we're like, we're done. Check it out. You can actually beat it. And then we're starting to see like, holy shit, like it takes people like 80 hours to beat it, to get through that midsection. So we made some tuning and adjustments from there, but I think, your first impression is always what people walk away with. And so the general impression or critique that the game is a bit long, I think was certainly true and probably remains true, although not as bad. But I'm not going to run around and keep trying to convince people that it's not as bad as you once thought. I think we just keep on rolling and doing what we can do.
Yeah. It's also because like the bosses, which are some of my favorite bits in it. The fact that like you beat all of the bosses like at the low level, then you get to the mid level and it's the same bosses but harder. It's like it's slightly less thrilling because it's the exact same thing, but the fact it's more difficult makes it worth going through. But
yeah, I think there's room there. We could have added to their skill sets as you advanced. And many people, myself included, are like, well, why don't they look different each stage? And all of that would have been cool. But what was there even took all of us working just like dogs for 2 years. And it's just kind of the perils of the small team. You have to pick your battles and spend your time where you're going to have the maximum impact. So to me, it's like, what's better, one new boss or visual upgrades on 3 other bosses? It's too bad. I hate having to make that choice because honestly, I think it would be cool if like Necromancer 1 didn't look nearly as cool as Necromancer 3 or whatever, and played a little differently. But those are just some of the decisions you have to sort of face when you're out there making the thing.
On the topic of trailers, I hate that there's like, you said there was like almost like a formula, like, oh, here there must be this, and this, but that doesn't really work because you look at the best trailers and the ones that people remember, I don't think any of them follow this formula. Like, there's a game that released a trailer recently called Atomic Heart. Have you heard of it?
No.
I haven't seen it actually.
Yeah, it's set in this like Russian experimental thing. They like experiment on people and stuff. And it's kind of a horror action game, but throughout all of it, they have classical Russian music playing, and it's quite upbeat while the person explores the horrors of this like creepy Russian lab and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And and that stuff's really impactful too. And I know Max is gonna hate me for this, but Halo 3's marketing, I don't think I remember a single trailer where you just see Master Chief shooting people with guns. Almost all of them were like slow, methodical, like heavy on music and stuff.
I remember the first time I saw anything like anachronistic like that. Like they had the REM song playing with the Gears of War, like way back in the day for Gears 1.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my god, it's amazing. And you look back, it's a little cheesy, but I think it was a bold move at the time to get something like, pop rock ballad and do everything in slow motion while it's just a ripped dude shooting at an alien.
Yeah. But like just if you're taking notes from like how to make trailers from like what Call of Duty or something like that, no one's gonna remember them. They're just really, boring trailers don't stick with people. So I don't know how you could possibly formulate something like that.
Oh, I just went around the internet and looked at like, best practices, and like I wanted to educate myself and then decide which rules I wanted to break. I think the most important thing is to be really, really true to the spirit of what you're making. So if you're making a fast-paced, like if you're making oh my god, why can't I remember the name? The car soccer on Steam. Rocket League. Yeah. If you're making car soccer, by all means, like, have a crazy trailer with crazy stuff, because your game's crazy. And that really honors the spirit of what people can expect. But I always I think the best marketing is like an extension of the soul of the product, not a sort of separate representation of it, catering to a particular audience. So I think you want to keep it as tied together as possible.
My favorite kind of marketing is usually the kind that almost feels like bonus content.
Totally. Yeah.
Like you can watch some of these trailers for these games and feel like even years after the games come out and be like, oh, it's so cool. Like that's fun. That's great. And that's great stuff. And sometimes like even trailers that'll like add stuff to the lore of the game, like just little bonus details that aren't even in there because they couldn't fit them for like production.
One of my biggest pet peeves is like watching a trailer for a movie and it basically chronologically touches base at every stage of the film except for the climax, which is going to shake out in the right direction. Yeah. It's brutal. I like it when things are... Yeah, exactly. But I remember the Anchorman trailer, and that's a comedy. But the original Anchorman trailer was all outtakes, and so you sat down and you'd never see the stuff from the trailer in the movie. That's actually really... It was great. Cool. Yeah.
Comedy trailers are usually the fucking worst because they always put the best jokes in the trailer.
Of course. And then you're like, basically, you've seen the tent poles, and now all you have left is the sagging tent in between.
Yeah, it's... Like, I recently watched that Jurassic Park, the new one, and the trailer, it literally everything that was cool that happened in that movie, the trailer had already shown. So, like, if you can watch the trailer in replacement of the movie, what's the point, really?
The worst ones are like fucking the studios make them without the director's consent, and they just put spoilers for the movie in the trailer. How to Train Your Dragon 2 had that. How to Train Your Dragon 2 had, like, they revealed the mom was still alive and all that stuff, and he finds her. That's, like, not shown till an hour in the movie, and it's meant to be, like, a big reveal.
You're just waiting around for it to happen.
Yeah, I'm like, I already know who this is. There's no mystery, because the trailer... The director was apparently really mad about that as well.
I would be pretty PO'd.
Oh, yeah, just throw away the huge plot point I'm setting up in the trailer. Might as well. So... Can we talk about Darkest Dungeon's art style? Because that's one of the things that makes it really distinctive to me.
Of course, yeah.
So what were some of your inspirations for it? Because I absolutely adore the art style of this game. It's beautifully, scary and morbid.
There was a couple things. I'd been doing a lot of digital painting, and it takes a long time. I've done work for like Privateer Press and Games Workshop, and like they want their Space Marines rendered in excruciating detail with like little chips of paint off it, and all that stuff is fine, but it takes a really long time and it's kind of tedious. And so I was looking for something that was maybe a little bit more visceral, and I wanted to get back to maybe some of my influences that shaped me as an artist growing up. So I read a lot of comic books. It was before or just as the internet started. I got my first email in first year university. So my entire adolescence, there was no such thing as the internet, which I'm sure makes me sound extremely old. But so it was all comics that kind of was the driving force behind that. So the first time I saw Mike Mignola was in an issue of X-Force that he did. He filled in from Rob Liefeld, and I remember feeling like I was ripped off. I shouldn't have bought the comic because it was just so bad. And then I was like mad, and I threw the comic, in the corner of my room, and then the next day I picked it up again, and I was like, just how could anybody draw like this? It doesn't even make sense, because I'm so conditioned by like Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, all the lines and all that stuff. But it just like something about it, even though I didn't like it, it stuck with me, and then I got more and more of his stuff. So Mike Mignola was a big influence. Guy Davis was another one. He did a comic called The Marquis, which is like this really messed up kind of gothic Parisian, I don't know, demon hunter thing. It's really cool. So I was looking at a lot of these guys when it was time to make the game, but the biggest driver, like I wasn't just sourcing my favorite stuff. I wanted the art style to really reinforce the game design. So I think the hard edges are sort of a testament to like the hard choices and the uncompromising kind of gameplay vision.
Yeah.
And the shadows and having everything go into black isn't just because the name of the game is Darkest Dungeon, but also because like they're always getting swallowed up by stress and weakness. So I felt like, people are always afraid of the dark. Let's have everything look like it's kind of coming out of the dark, or being swallowed up by it, if you want to look at it the other way. And it also had to be I needed a consistent sloppiness so that I could produce all of these assets alone in a timely fashion. And if I was doing every single thing in the game the best I could do it, I would never finish. It would never be good. Like the treasure chest alone would take me a week, and it's still, I would keep going back to it to try and make it look better and better and better, to make it be the best treasure chest I've ever drawn, because this was my game and this was my shot kind of thing. So I knew that I had to sort of externalize the art direction and not make it about Chris so much as about what the game needed. And that would help me sort of say, look, it's the treasure chest is fine. It's consistent. It matches everything else. It's not the best thing I've ever drawn. There's a lot in the game that is not the best stuff I've ever drawn. In fact, I don't think any of it individually. I think my goal was always like, as a totality, the work is worthy, but not if you take apart like every hand or every pose or every background. Some of them are thrown together quite quickly just out of necessity. But having an art style that I could sort of make sure that I ticked all these boxes really helped, because I could basically say, okay, that's finished. It's good enough. And good enough over a long enough timeline, over enough assets, starts looking nice and tight. And then I would double back and try to improve it. I don't want to create the impression that I was just like, it doesn't matter, who cares? I was like, obviously cared a great deal, but I knew that I would die if I was trying to do like Chris's best on every single thing. And that was my only way of judging if the work was good enough. So by sort of coming up with an art style that wasn't necessarily how I had been working in the past, I could create something that I could route my assessment through and make sure that I was maintaining forward progress. So it's kind of a hybrid of all that stuff. My favorite things growing up, and comic books, and the game design itself, and the need for expediency in production.
Something about the art style that I like, which is I believe to be a little subtle thing, is that you never see any of the characters' eyes, really. Every single one of them is completely blacked out, and like eyes are a big in design. They're like a big necessity for like humanity. That's why in like sci-fi shit they're always taking off their damn helmets, even when it makes no sense, so you can see their eyes. And
yeah, they do it in all the superhero movies now too, like Iron Man,
Yeah.
Black Panther. They keep taking their helmets off to do a performance and then put it back
Yeah.
on to go to CG.
But that lack of eyes is almost like a lack of humanity. And that's I really like that as an aesthetic thing. Like it ties into the narrative and the tone.
Yeah, I like the idea that everybody who showed up in the Hamlet is sort of damned, and it's almost like the game is a Twilight Zone episode. Like, to me, the town almost exists. Like, we don't talk about the world outside the Hamlet, for that reason. I want to create the sense that once you go in along that road, you've always been there and you can never leave, kind of thing. And so these characters that show up on the stagecoach are almost like, yeah, they're kind of damned souls, so they don't have any light left in their eyes.
Well, there's the guy with the dog, and he seems very protective of it. I love.
Yeah, they can still be decent people, but like
Yeah.
soulless in a way. I don't know.
I love how affectionate he is for that dog. Like whenever he gets attacked, he'll like block the dog so it doesn't get hurt. I love little things like that.
That was fun to do, but the truth is, like, I'm pretty ambivalent on dogs.
Really?
I grew up with cats. I don't need all of the panting and the scraping and the walking and the picking up the hot shit off the road. I don't need any of that really in my life. And Tyler's like huge dog guy. Had 3 dogs, got rid of those. Like, they passed away, got more dogs. Always with the dogs. So I was just trying to honor the dog lovers out there with that character, but it was not. It was not necessarily speaking to my preferences.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which, like, out of the characters that you get to like control, you don't exactly play as them, but which ones do you like enjoy the design of most? Like, which did you have most fun making?
It's so hard.
Yeah.
That's so hard.
It would be a difficult question.
One of them set as your profile picture.
Yeah. I like them all for different reasons. I think like big part of the design behind the heroes, I looked at superheroes because I grew up with superhero comics. Mm-hmm. And I find like, if you're trying to do low fantasy, the danger is that these characters just end up looking like weathered people in beat up armor of different shapes. And that's not really memorable or interesting or iconic. So I wanted to inject our cast of characters with just a little bit of that like superhero archetype. So like the leper has kind of like the Iron Man kind of mask. The Abomination is like a Hulk. There's a whole bunch of like the Shadow was a big inspiration behind the Highwayman. I don't know if you guys know the Shadow. It's like a 1930s pulp character. He had a couple of guns and ran around New York shooting people. Kind of a psychopath when you describe him that way, but he looked really cool and he had a scarf up his nose. So there's a lot of like, the Crow, obviously for the Jester. There was a lot of that kind of stuff just in the background because I felt like if I could add just that pinch of salt to the mix, then it would kind of make these guys stand out and be more than just a mannequin with some beat up armor on it. Oh, yeah. So for that reason, because I tried to think through, a lot of their backgrounds and stuff when I was doing them, it's hard for me to really pick an absolute favorite. I'm a huge fan of like roguey ladies, so like the Grave Robbers probably, if I had to pick one, probably be her. I like the Highwayman a lot because I like the sword or the short sword gun kind of combo, and I like the scarf. I like the Bounty Hunter though too because he's Batman and Boba Fett, and they're 2 of my favorite dudes. So, but then once I start going through the list, I can just do something I like about each of them, and then you'll be like, you didn't answer the question. Jester I came up with in high school. Yeah, exactly. It's really hard. I came up with a Jester in high school. And, obviously without any context, I just thought like the limp Jester hat was kind of cool. And I was like in high school, so like he had to be all emo. So he's got a lot of history there. But yeah, I think like generally the kind of more roguey guys are always my favorites. Although I will say I liked the leper a lot. It's a non-answer. Sorry.
No, that's
it's a good non-answer.
It's better than like, oh, I like the Plague Doctor.
Yeah, Plague Doctor's cool too, though.
Plague Doctor. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not trying to knock the Plague Doctor. I'm just.
No, I think
that's the first one in Google Images right now.
Oh, I see. Yeah, for that one, I wanted to like do the whole like Samus thing where we didn't really talk about her gender, and then just be like, I don't know, it's a woman in there. Don't worry about it. We still get people on our subreddit going like, I just realized that Plague Doctor's a woman.
What?
Yeah, I love it.
Oh.
God.
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, on a similar vein, like, I don't know why, but I really like the design of just the enemies in Crimson Court. It's just so weird to me to see, like vampire tropes attached to, like, insectoids. I love that combo. It's so good.
Yeah, I think that worked out really well for us. We hadn't done vampires anywhere else in the game, and we'd done like, witches and trolls, and, the pigs are essentially orcs, like we'd done kind of all of that stuff. And so I was always holding vampires back because I'm like, I don't want to have like a dude with a pale face in a cloak, or, like a hot lady who suddenly bites you after seducing you. It was just so on the nose. So like when we went to do, we started talking about doing like a big DLC. I tried to look outside. Same way I kind of was looking at superheroes to design low fantasy characters. I was just trying to look outside of like the established vampire stuff, and like, hey, actually, what does need blood to live? Like, you got black flies, you got ticks, you've got mosquitoes, things like that. And so I'm like, okay, now let's jam that into the vampire French aristocracy thing and see what we can do.
Yeah,
that and like insects are something that would cause panic. Like if I were in a cave looking for some fucking treasure or something, and I came across a giant spider, that would probably cause me to stress out a bit.
Oh, insects are really gross.
Yeah.
Even without the blood stuff. I had done all the art for the game up until that point. So through the town event updates and all the early access stuff and the final dungeons and all that. And so I'm like, I can't continue to do this. And so I hired a woman named Trudy Castle, who's really, really talented artist. And so she came in for that DLC to help out, and it was awesome being able to like work back and forth with someone, and she was really committed to picking up the style. And then I found out like months after we shipped the thing, so she'd been doing this for like a year. She's like, no, I have a huge phobia of spiders and bugs. I'm like, why didn't you knew what the job was? Like, how did you, she's like, well, I just kind of got used to it, I guess, but no, I fucking hate them. So
well, that's why it's good to make them the enemy. You can crush them. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but knowing the game, it's more likely they'll crush you. So.
No, not if you're good like I am.
Okay.
I happen to be the #1 darkest dungeon player in the world, so.
Oh, wow. Well,
when having not completed the game at all.
When our DLC comes out, you can post your kill count and
how you're
doing. Does it come with a leaderboard? Because that's
we thought about it, but because we opened up all the files to modding, the leaderboards, like there's no way to do it properly unless we set up an entire back end, and like it just would not be worth the investment to try and police leaderboards.
There's some shit like I hate people who cheat on leaderboards. It's so you ruin it. Like I loved Cluster Truck when that came out. And I was so proud of myself because I made it to #9 in the whole world on one level. And then some asshole was like, oh, check this out, 0.001 seconds. I'm like, you're cool.
Yeah, it's kind of, there's no point. Like okay, great. So put 0. It took you no time to do it. Now what? Like,
you just fucking cheated. Speaking of mods, how do you feel? You have the workshop open, and a lot of mods have come from that. How do you feel about that kind of stuff?
I think it's great. I think it allows people who are want to experience the game either like you were saying, or we were talking about the sort of the grind. Like you can go in there and shop around and attach a bunch of things to the game to help it in the way that you want. There's even some like really ambitious complete rule set overhauls that are out there, which is neat to see people like experimenting and seeing how far they can push the systems. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. it makes it 100 times better, like instantly. The workshop is just such an amazing tool. Like this game, XCOM has one too, which is great.
Yeah, I think it's neat too because like it allows a respectful differentiation between the adjustment and the original product. You know, like it's cool to be able to be like, no, here's the game that we made. So, you know, it sits over here. And then if you want to add or take away or adjust or whatever, then there's a whole interface to do that. But you're conscious of what you're doing when you subscribe to those mods. It's not, you don't sort of slowly chip away at it or whatever. And it allows the main game to still stand on its own, which I think is great. It's just healthy for our community too, because, you know, some people swear by some mods and it creates a lot of good, healthy debate. And, you know, as long as people are having fun playing the game, that's what's really important.
Oh, and it absolutely boosts longevity. Like
totally.
Especially for single-player games like Darkest Dungeon and XCOM, just having a huge mod support will keep people playing for years is like, well, I already beat the game like 3 times, but now I can beat it with all these different little things. Like, I'm going to turn it into fucking The Witcher 3 mod. I'm going to overhaul it and make it look like Witcher or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, they're still having fun in the sort of the baseball diamond that we built, you know? So it's great. I mean, would I want every single vendor to be a hot anime babe? I mean, no, I wouldn't. I think that kind of breaks the theme of the game. But if that's what you're into, there's a mod for that. If you want garter belts on the Rave Robber, there's a mod for that too. If you want more inventory space, there's a mod for that. So, you know, it ranges from like just these kind of cosmetics things that, you know, are all over the map to like actual rule tweaks and changes, and, you know, right, like I said, right up into like complete overhauls. So it's really cool, and it just gives people more ways to play.
I think one of the reasons like big companies don't like to use the workshop a lot is because you don't see AAA games with workshop support very often, and I think it's because like they always want to make DLC, but they're afraid, I guess, that the workshop makes DLC redundant. But it doesn't really. If anything, like I think the workshop support would. I don't have any numbers to back this up, but I think workshop support, and if anything, would improve DLC sales. Because if you look at something like, I'm going to bring up again XCOM 2, once they released War of the Chosen, there was a bunch of new assets and everything that modders could play with, and then, you know, you like, oh, I want that mod, but it's only supported with War of the Chosen, so I'm going to get that mod. You know, I'm going to get that, I'm going to buy War of the Chosen, so...
I see.
I think that works like that. I don't have any numbers backing it up.
I think the fact, like you're saying, you know, you've got no numbers, but you feel like it should work. I think that feeling alone is worth something. So creating a feeling around your game of inclusivity and opportunity for exploration and expansion and adjustment, and making your game almost into a bit of a creative sandbox for people. That's just a good feeling. Oh, yeah. And so even without numbers to back it up, it just sounds nice. And so there's got to be some truth to it, just purely from a qualitative standpoint. I can tell you, having looked at some numbers, I think it has helped us. Definitely, I think it's increased our tail, which is what you call, like, I don't know how familiar you guys are, so forgive me if I'm saying something you already know, but like you sell vastly more on your first couple of days after launch, and then your sales tail way off. And the length of time that you can stretch out your low selling period is usually called your game's tail. And you know, we get a write-up on PC Gamer that says, here's some great mods for Darkest Dungeon. Well, people might go and buy Darkest Dungeon because they saw that feature on PC Gamer, and we didn't have to do anything for that. That was just the mods, or the existence of mods, helping or drive some awareness of the game itself. So I think it's been really good for us. Something
I do know is that in Halo 3, the best-selling DLCs were the ones that had blank canvas maps, which you could forge on. Right. They had Sandbox and Foundry. Those two maps were the most popular in the entire game, and that definitely helped sell the DLC because it was a creative sandbox, giving people the tools, just like selling the tools, basically, kind of. It always improves. It always improves sales, I believe, that kind of stuff. People love creative sandboxes. It always improves games longevity. Like, remember, Just Cause 3 had an entire... Just Cause 2 and 3 had a multiplayer mod, just like made by fans.
Wow.
They made the entire multiplayer by themselves. It's great.
Well, yeah, I think people are doing that for like Skyrim and stuff as well.
Yeah.
Oh, Skyrim
insanity.
is just probably one of the best examples of how much mods can keep a game
Oh,
alive
yeah.
and relevant
And-
for
and
like
then-
vastly beyond its expected life cycle.
And then Bethesda's like, ooh, let me get a chunk of that.
Hey, then they showed us some mountains at E3.
It was a pretty mountain, to be fair. Come on.
It was
Yeah,
some quite nice mountains.
It was a very nice looking mountain.
They were modded mountains, I think.
The fans made that mountain.
Yeah.
We decided to outsource the video game. What was that? What was the game at E3 that actually did that? It's like there was a game at E3 that's.
I have no idea.
Speaking of DLC, you're coming out with a DLC for Darkest Dungeon soon, aren't you?
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally 2 days.
Yep. It's been a Father's Day work day weekend. Things are going pretty good, actually. We've got I think we only got a couple of really like solid medium bugs, but nothing game breaking. Knocking on, you can hear me knocking there.
Yeah.
Hopefully nothing blows up at the 11th hour, but we're getting our release candidate together now. We're doing this thing, like, it's kind of a lark. I don't know if it'll work, but we're doing a thing where we invited a couple, like 15 or so of streamers that have played a lot of the game, and we're letting them in a day early, and we're doing a sort of a charity contest where, like, whoever gets the top kill count in this new endless survival mode after 2 days will donate money to their charity for first, second, and third place.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, they're going to start tomorrow at 10 in the morning, and we'll see who gets the biggest number at the end of a couple of days. And there's a ton of base game changes to the heroes' skills and monsters that have gone in. So it should be a pretty meaty update, even if you don't buy the DLC. I've done a lot of.
I saw in the trailer, like, there's a moment where there's an abomination on the same party as a Vestal, and I was like, oh, that's not normal.
It's not normal at all. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff. Like we got a lot of feedback, and we did a lot of testing on like every single hero has had their combat skills and camping skills looked at. And by looked at, I don't mean just passed over. Like Tyler he went away for 2 weeks. He's like, I'll see you guys later. And like was just head in the numbers, checking stuff out and really digging in. So the patch notes will be up tomorrow if that interests you. And then the streamer contest will kick off, and you'll get to see all the content a day early. And then if you like what you see, you can pick it up on Tuesday.
I'm definitely planning on it because I like the aesthetic of this DLC. It's just like the blue is such a nice color to contrast it, like everything in that game normally.
I kind of got redded out after Crimson Court. I was like, I need a break from red because the game has a lot of red in it anyway.
There's the green DLC coming out.
Yeah, well, this one's got a fair amount of teal. The color of madness is sort of a teal. I don't know if you've ever been to a hospital, but yeah.
But like, because of this DLC coming out, I listened to The Color Out of Space because I like listening to Lovecraft audiobooks occasionally, and whoa, I like that. It's a very good like inspiration for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it even cuts closer than inspiration. Like we were sitting around going like, okay, we want to do this like survival thing. How can we do it? And then we just latched onto that story, and we're like, oh, let's sort of do a tribute to it, kind of thing. So obviously it's not identical, but it was a major source of like, it'd be fun to kind of bring this story back and tell it slightly differently and make it relevant and compatible with our game fiction, but it's unapologetically driven by Color Out of Space for sure. Just the fact that all the guys are like dissolving all the time, and
yeah. It was a really good story. Lovecraft was a very good writer. Yeah,
say what you will about his weirdo politics, but he knew how to come up with creepy ideas.
Oh yeah, that's the common thing throughout history. Like very monumental people usually had weird ideas.
Yeah, it's better to look at people about their ideas more than what they believed. Like
Yeah.
what they actually gave is more important. So
Yeah. Like,
Yeah, I think
Lovecraftian horror is great. But...
Yeah, he really put a button on like, you know, what cosmic horror is, and how it could be told in a way, and I like that everything is suggested, and it's much, much worse than you can ever get an appreciation for in the story, and I like that none of his protagonists usually, you know, do too well coming out of it.
yeah.
So I think, you know, like those themes are universally tapped into something, you know, very, very true about, like, you know, uncertainty and fear of irrelevance is a big source of horror.
Oh yeah, like when I had to research Lovecraft a while ago, and like one of his big things was like lack of God as a big motivator. Like one of the big things is like, there can't really be much evidence of a God, because if there is a God, then there is purpose.
Yeah, I think that's the big dawning, the crowning horror when they come face to face with something like Cthulhu or some weird creature from the stars or whatever. It's not the creature. Like, I think a lot of movies get it wrong where they're like, look how gross this creature is, and you just rip somebody in half, and that's certainly terrifying in the moment. But the real horror is that if that creature exists, everything we thought about where we sit in the universe, how important we think we are, all of it is garbage.
Yeah,
and that's the scary thing about Cthulhu, is not that he's like a 7-story tall squid dragon that he's going to stomp around Manhattan and cause a bunch of wreckage. It's that, like, he exists, and that means that we're not nearly as important as we thought we were.
Yeah,
and that's the scariest thing of all.
I always thought about War of the Worlds, the old classic. I always thought about it like, I always thought about that in a Lovecraftian way, where those aliens come down. The ending ruins it completely, but if you change the ending where they don't get killed by disease or whatever, then, and they just like continue to wipe out humanity, and the guys like hold out underground or something, then it becomes really kind of Lovecraftian, because there's these things we don't know their motivations, which is very important. They're otherworldly. We don't even know if they have motivations. They've just come to kill, and they're way better at it than we are, and there's literally nothing we can do against them. I always had this idea, if it took place in modern day, like you drop a nuke on some of the tripods, and you're like, yeah, we did it, woo! And then it just rises up out of the burning ash, and there's just nothing you can do against it.
Yeah, that vulnerability is very, very terrifying, because we like to think that, you know, as people, we have the run of the place to a fault. You know? Yeah,
you always think like, oh, War of the Worlds is set in the 1800s. If that were to happen today, our military would be able to just fucking decimate them. Yeah,
well, not if you're telling the story properly, right? It wouldn't matter when it happened. It could happen in the year 4000 when we all have PlayStations embedded in our brains and we have laser guns coming out of our fingernails. But they would, to tell that story properly, they would always have to be like 5 steps ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I like the whole, the fact that something's unknowable is what makes it terrifying as well, and that's a beautiful little concept. It's so good.
So we have set up a few questions from fans. If you'd like to take some of those.
Sure. Yeah. Totally.
All right.
I mean, I already asked one without crediting it, which was the like characters you like the most. So that was by
yes, my rich non-answer there.
Well,
enjoy that one.
It was high in content, low in answer, but who cares? You got a question from Sparky's friend Jack Farrell, which is, do you think genre oversaturation is an issue in the industry, and if so, how does Darkest Dungeon avoid the pitfalls?
That's a big question. That is very far-reaching in its implication. Genre oversaturation, I think, certainly is a thing that happens. We see survival games blew up, and there's a million bajillion survival games. The battle royale genre has totally blown up, and I'm sure that we're only in like year 1 of seeing royale style games.
Oh yeah.
But what I've noticed is, everyone is very quick to decry something as being dead. I think it fits nicely into like 140, 280 characters. And it's like a nice hot take to be like, the Royale genre is dead. And you get maybe some likes and some retweets or whatever. But I remember when poker, like Hold'em, blew up a number of years ago, and everyone was playing poker. And then it kind of faded away and went away. But more people play poker now than they did before it blew up. And I've noticed that these genres explode, then they necessarily contract a little, but there's more genres now than there was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I don't think survival is going to ever disappear as a genre. I think that it will only get, refined and enriched over time. And I think it'll be the same with Royale. I don't think there's never not going to be a Royale game now. There's always going to be one out there. And so I think the trick is that you don't want to be like 10th in lines and doing the same thing that the guy in third did. Because then you're sort of derivative of a derivative. You're like a photocopy of a photocopy. But I don't think that it's necessarily like, if someone said, I want to make a survival game, I wouldn't immediately tell them that that's a foolish thing to do. I would want to hear how they're going to make a survival, how they're going to incorporate that set of features into something that is interesting given the genre saturation. But I don't think it should ever stop people from, dreaming of games or thinking about making, games and say, okay, well, you know what? There's too many of this type of game, so forget it. There's a lot of lawyers in the world,
Mm-hmm.
that there's still a lot of people going to law school. And I know that the example doesn't totally carry over, but I guess I'm just saying, like, there seems to be an appetite now because there are more people playing games for more different types of games. And so I think that as long as you're being cognizant of what's out there and you are thinking about that when you're developing your feature set, I don't think that you should live in fear of a genre evaporating once it's sort of broken ground, if that makes sense. And how did we avoid it is the second part of that question, I think. Yeah. We didn't. I feel like fantasy archetypes we didn't. I feel like fantasy stuff is kind of evergreen. Like, there's always going to be a million RPGs. There's always going to be guys in armor fighting other guys in armor or monsters. It's always going to be there. So like, let's just take it for granted that's always going to be there. What's our twist on it? That they're actually people inside the armor and they get afraid and they fall apart and they're weak. And that's kind of interesting, and we hadn't seen that done before. So we just felt that, like, our twist on the established tropes and paradigms of the genre would sort of help carry the day. I don't think the game would have worked as well if we had done it as a steampunk game or as a Blade Runner cyberpunk type game just to avoid doing fantasy. I think it actually works better as a fantasy game.
That's the thing, is when you think typical fantasy, you think Tolkien-esque fantasy, like you got the dwarves and all the elves and shit. If I were to compare Darkest Dungeon to anything, Lord of the Rings would probably be the last thing I think of, honestly.
Yeah, it's a difference between high and low fantasy for sure. That's more aspirational, even though the stakes are high in Tolkien. It has a lot more of that sort of lore and richness, and I wanted to take like swords and armor, but really give it the 1930s kind of Lovecraft vibe.
If I were to think of like anything, I would think of like the Black Plague, the video game. Almost, it feels like.
Yeah, and that was one of the things we talked about when we were making the game. Is like, when is this set, right? Because we have barbarians, and then we have people with flintlock stuff, and I come back to the Twilight Zone thing where it's like I kind of want it a bit nebulous. I don't want you to be like, the year is 1624 and this is what's going on. It's like, no, this happens in a world where maybe the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages stretched for like an extra couple hundred years. So things are just kind of like the way they are. And then that becomes the game's identity. We don't have to explain everything.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for like one more question left. What do you think?
I mean, I have a small question, which was, whose idea was it to create the caretaker, and why is he always in the wrong place at the wrong time? Like, that's a question from me. No one wrote in that one.
I can't remember. I mean, we needed somebody to get you to the estate right? Because the ancestor was dead.
Yeah.
And I love the greasy caretaker from like every single, classic 70s Hammer horror movie, the creepy guy who's like, oh, don't go up to the house on the hill or whatever. So like that trope is something that we wanted in the game. I can't remember where the idea was to have him actually like occupy spaces. I think it just forces you. It could have been Tyler. It just forces you into other treatment options that might be suboptimal, and it just goes to the whole theme in the game, which is like you've got to roll with the punches. And later in the game, when you start unlocking town events, the town crier also starts occupying places in the town. So the further you go in the game, it's just yet another curveball that we try to throw at you to try and make sure that you can't always just rely on the best way. In fact, hopefully, I mean, ideally in our game, there is no actual best way. It's just a series of decisions you make out of necessity. Although it is a video game and it can be exploited, and certainly we have top tier players who can basically just shred the game.
Yeah.
But the design intent, was always that you're doing the best with what you have. So yeah, I want to put him in the bar, but the caretaker's in the bar. God damn it. Okay, well now I have to choose the more expensive treatment at the cost of maybe a weapon upgrade that I wanted to afford because I don't have enough money. God damn it. So those god damn it moments are like, I really want those in there, and I think that's why first time players. I think it's why we have a good attachment rate. Like once you play it for a little while, you really want to play more because I think that sense of discovery and goddammiting is interesting and compelling. And then once you master it, because the game is always saying like kind of fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Once you master it, you're like no, it's my turn, and then that creates a real sense of attachment to our high end players who can 100% the game no problem, but they keep coming back because I think that they just like to beat up on the bully,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But that's just my own theory. I don't have numbers to back that up.
You don't track all the stats? Like every time a player takes a footstep or some shit like that?
We have some metrics in there. We've turned them off now because of the thing in Europe where they changed the privacy requirements. But we were really transparent about what we collect. But yeah, we had some metrics, and then we would pull down and see like, okay, it looks like nobody's using fucking hook and slice from the bounty hunter. Like nobody uses that skill. So then that's a great way to say, okay, like we got to give them something that's a little bit more useful or tweak it. So.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for coming on and talking with us. Very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
We encourage anyone out there who hasn't played Darkest Dungeon yet to please do so. It's a very fun game, and have a good day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.